which difference is respected and understood without coercion. And it's that attitude, I think, that we need.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Green Light is a Radar. I'm Leon Denise.
And I'm Raneem Leila.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Orientalism. We're going to focus more on what is Orientalism. We're going to define it. We're going to give it more of a historical context for you guys to be in the scene with us to understand more of how we're going to be talking about Orientalism today. How are we going to be discussing and having these discussions about Orientalism actually?
Yeah, and it's super important that we talk about this today because I think, Orientalism is not that much talked about or recognized, because even when I'm typing it, Orientalism, it always gives me an error. Orientalism is not actually known or recognized enough. So I think it's important that we raise awareness, that we talk about it. So whatever information you have about the term Orientalism, let's stick to the end with us to this episode to see how much your understanding of it developed and,
Yeah, so let's start, I guess, with a definition of what Orientalism is. So Orientalism is actually a term to describe the representation and the understanding of the East by the West, with the scholars and writers writing about the East actually from the West's eyes.
Yeah, so Orientalism was actually a term developed by the scholar Edward Said to describe the way that the West views the Orient or the East. And, this view is usually consists of, it looks at them as inferior, uncivilized, and basically all around weird. All around weird. And, this is also to simultaneously portray the West as the Orient's opposite. So basically they try to visualize the West as, superior, as civilized, as wonderful. And so we can think of Orientalism as Easternism or stereotyping.
Yeah, exactly. And to give a more understanding into it actually. So in Orientalism actually, Said argues that the Western scholars and thinkers had actually created a stereotype, an exotic image of actually the East, just to kind of show it this way to the Western media and the Western people and societies to understand more of what the East is. And I guess it's just not simply an approach of an objective study of it, but it's more of, it shows the Western imperialism, the colonialism, and actually the power and the experience of power that is happening there.
Yeah, so think of it this way. Imagine that you're walking into a movie to watch, you're going to the cinemas to watch a 3D movie. You would put on glasses to actually feel like you're in the movie, to visualize yourself.
To feel like you're included in the scene.
Exactly. So Orientalism is also like a pair of glasses that actually distorts your image, and it shows cultural and religious differences as exotic, as strange, and sometimes even dangerous. It really exaggerates cultural differences.
And actually, while Said's book actually was actually an influential book to everyone from both the East and the West, it also got a lot of critiques about it. It was criticized as maybe the West don't want to actually, they want to view the East in a way, but they're not trying to harm them, or it's nonetheless not trying to actually harm them in any way. It's just a way of how they're trying to view the East as well, just an understanding for them. And actually we are not kind of blocking that actually some Western scholars did put in some effort to actually get to know the Middle East more and understand more of its culture. But nonetheless, the term Orientalism is actually remained as an important concept for discussion about the cultural representation, about the power dynamics, and the impact of colonial history on actually the contemporary perspectives of the East as well.
Yeah, and just like Said argued, the term Orientalism is actually sort of a European construction, basically. It is used to represent the domination of the East by the West, to also justify this sort of imperialism, the Western imperialism.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess it was actually so clear to us this thing. So when talking about women in the Middle East, they see them, for example, as it just appears as only exotic or like a belly dancer or oppressed, and with no actual middle ground in between. And you might actually have seen many men actually portrayed as exotically romantic, or more recently as crazy and angry, or they have anger issues, as we say, and as a tourists, or they can't just like see them as ordinary human beings along the way with
Yeah.
other stuff.
All of this is Orientalism, and many Arabs, Muslims, and even Asians, like at this point, they use the term Orientalism to also sort of describe their unique, one-of-a-kind racist experiences, because Orientalism sort of encapsulates for many, like, you know, how their culture, how their religion, how their ethnicity is, like, it's often so reduced to stereotypes, negative stereotypes, and you know, this causes their humanity to be overlooked, even their culture is misunderstood.
But don't you think this is just a way of stereotyping then?
Well, yes and no, because Orientalism is like a much broader set of, like, you know, power relations. For example, the US, when the US government views the Middle East, the, like, you know, the East, they view them through these Orientalist glasses, and this creates policies with very far-reaching consequences, dangerous consequences, from outright war, from a travel ban imposed on groups of people. It just can get really far.
And I think actually perhaps the trickiest thing about Orientalism is that it's not just simply ignorance or lack of knowledge, but it's just actually the opposite. It's like it's historically been actually produced as knowledge.
Yeah.
It was actually there as knowledge of the East without actually knowing the East. It was just stereotypes that were there to put kind of a title for it as that's the knowledge about the East that we have.
Yeah.
And I think actually a statement that was said by Donald Trump, he stated that I think Islam hates us. We can't allow people coming into this country who have actually much hate for United States. And I think he just actually literally simplified and like effectively criticized the 1.6 billion Muslims in the worldwide as anti-Americans as well.
Yeah, I mean, in this way, Orientalism doesn't just distort the way the West views the East, but also the other way around.
Definitely.
It creates this much sort of hostility between them. And even today, Orientalism still continues because it is so ingrained and so disseminated that we overlook it. Basically, like, you know, it's ingrained in how we see other people and their cultures that it goes unnoticed at this point. It's because of how much we're used to it.
And you know what I think? Even like when we are talking about Orientalism, as we said in the beginning, I don't think a lot of people understand what Orientalism is actually, because I think Orientalism is looked at as stereotypes and some cultural norms that are overlooked or concealed actually. And they're just like stereotypes that people have, the West actually have over the East. And it's not really defined as Orientalism sometimes. So not a lot of people are actually in knowledge and acknowledge what Orientalism is actually.
That is so true. And even, you know, it's so ingrained that even the term Middle East is an Orientalist term, if you think about it, because it standardizes a Western viewpoint. You know, they're basically referring to West Asia and North Africa as the middle of the East. And Orientalism just until this day remains super, super powerful because, as we said, it's not just about how the West views the East, but it's also the other way around right now. So to give, you know, further examples to understand this, what would you think of when I tell you a Western company is about to launch like an ad campaign or a movie? You know, you wouldn't bat an eye, would you? But if we're talking about like a Japanese film, the thing that would come to people's minds mostly like the first thing, it would probably be like ninjas or something.
Or like shoguns or something.
Basically. Or let's think of a Middle Eastern palace, for example. Think of it for a second. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Most Westerns would respond to you, I think of harems or of naked women or of emperors lauded by faceless masses. It's, you know, this is what Orientalism creates.
Yeah, true. And because we wanted to dive deep into that topic more, we actually had a research and article done about Orientalism just to give it more of an understanding and put it into real life to give examples of how we face that. So actually, just start with like what we're gonna just define again what is Orientalism in that study made by us.
Yeah, so Orientalism, as we've mentioned before, it was initially a book written by Edward Said in 1978, and the book was actually translated into 26 languages. Why? Because it has gotten everybody's attention, not just from the East, from the West as well. It got so much attention. The book was honestly an amazing academic and sort of life-changing book.
Actually.
And, you know, the idea of the book was about how the West viewed the East and how they basically judged the Middle East and their culture cultural and religious and, all of their practices. And, some people tried to write books about this topic that weren't really accurate, or there was so much misinformation on them. And
some of the scholars actually tried to change some of the history
Yes.
aspects that were done in books that were actually not written by the authors themselves. They just changed it upon their own opinion without the knowledge, the data, the information involved
changing
in
history and
actually.
adding false information without sort of any proof for them that that the author wrote the book to show the world the
Yeah.
truth. It's actually the opposite. They're showing misinformation, lies about how they viewed the Middle East. And it was just, they showed them how the West wanted them to be seen.
Yeah.
Which is
And
weird.
actually, when we read that book, we wanted to talk about a topic that I think is actually just another way of Orientalism. It's just literally the description of Orientalism nowadays. So we basically know about the Syrian and the Turkish people's like struggle and conflict between each other. And I don't think it's actually a conflict. I think it's more of a misunderstanding that happened in between. To give actually an example about it, Syria actually was like, after the war that happened, Turkey was the closest country to Syria. So refugees did come here because they were all welcomed, and they always have been welcomed to Turkey as well. So what happened there is that Syrian people wanted to gather in their own places, and Turkish people wanted to gather in their own communities as well. So none of like communicating or having any sort of interactions happened in between each other, which actually led to misinformation and false information spreading around. And as I was reading throughout the topic, I found this one article about, the headline was actually Assyrian smoking on a metro in Istanbul. So as we know, in Turkey, in Istanbul, it's forbidden to actually smoke on the
is.
trains or in the stations. And that's just something that we all know and aware of, and maybe because it has a lot of dangerous aspects as well. But the headline that was made by the media newspaper, actually the media outlet, was the following. It was like Assyrians smoking on a metro in Istanbul.
Emphasis on the Syrian.
Exactly. And after we actually like took a dive through like what was actually happening, and we investigated more of the story, we figured out that this actually video was an old video from like back 7 years before, and it was actually a Turkish citizen that was smoking. And I'm not here saying that like Turkish people are bad and they're smoking or something, but my point here is that they've just made that statement without actually acknowledging or without further research on who was the person in that situation.
They just saw a wrong act, and because of the Orientalist glasses that they're wearing,
Exactly.
they were like, okay, it must be Assyrian. Since
Yes.
it's a wrong act, we all know that this group of people are terrorists or something, so we're gonna put their names. This is what
And-
Orientalism is.
And there's another way actually of viewing this, as we know in like universities and students' life as we are students. There's two types of universities in Turkey, which is public universities or private universities. For public universities, you have to take an exam called DIOS to get into a public university. And after getting that exam, if you get a good grade, you can just pass on and go to the university and study there with whatever tuition fee this public university provide.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you get into a public university, you just have to pay the tuition fee, which is usually like around $3,000 per year to like it increases as much, but it starts with this rate. So you have to pay that amount to get enrolled in this private university. But it's actually a stereotype that was among the Turkish people and Turkish students. They think that Syrians don't have to pay because they're the government is providing for them, and they don't have to pay that amount to get into universities or to get any education as well. So that was just a stereotype and a way of an Orientalism, actually, a way
Yeah.
of how they were viewing the Syrians, because they didn't know much about them, and it was just the cultural norms and some actually aspects that happened. They saw it as, okay, that's the way it is, without acknowledging, without knowing what was the real truth behind it. And I guess it was not hard to do a research about it.
It really wasn't.
Yani,
It
it's
really wasn't.
it's one of the super easiest things to actually do a research about how and what is private universities and how does it work with like private and public universities, and
Yeah,
how to enroll in a private university. Like
But
that's
because
super
of how
easy.
ingrained the Orientalism
Yes.
is, just as we talked about, people just, they sort of take what they see for granted, and they just, for them, that's the normal. Like, okay, these people are terrorists and we don't want them, or they're just inferior people and we
And
just
what's
don't want to
scary
deal
is
with
that
them.
it's like it's kind of getting into the society in a point that no one is questioning what's happening.
Exactly.
We're taking these things as society norms, like as actually facts that are being spread without actually checking what's really the information we have. What is the base of that information? Where did it come from? We just take it as facts, and that's how we build on all the other informations coming as well.
Because it's even, like we said, it's creating really, really terrible consequences. And, it has a negative impact, not just like, from terms of racism experiences or something, but individual experiences can also be affected by this, because when you're stereotyped, you're thought of as somebody dangerous. People would stay away from you. People would sort of warn others about
Exactly.
you, which is honestly terrible, because again, it's sort of a dehumanization. It can create depression for one person who has to go through this or something.
And on a society level, actually, I think one of the reasons why racism is now here in our society as well is actually Orientalism.
Yes.
The way people have so many stereotypes among these people without actually knowing and getting to even talk to them. Like, some people don't put the effort to get to ask about these questions that they have. It's just the stereotypes that are there, and they just take it for granted as well.
So imagine, like, a Middle Eastern once told me that when he traveled to Europe, he had to study in Italy, a friend of mine. And his first question was, "You probably live in a palace with harems, and how is that like?" That is Orientalism for
Or
them.
maybe for Pakistanis, I have a Pakistani student. She was told that you probably just want to steal us.
Which is honestly crazy.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think an amazing way to conclude this episode would be to mention that we're all humans, and we're all sort of here with the same mission, and getting to know and understand each other's cultures, having some conversations to help you understand, each other more. And instead of spreading false and misinformation and like wrong data, I think, we should
Getting
get
to
to know
educate ourselves more about it.
we should get to know each other more. We should educate ourselves. We should try to understand other people's cultures, and actually we can view the differences in culture and religions as an opportunity to grow and develop ourselves.
Definitely. So, at the end of this episode, thank you guys so much for watching us, and stay tuned for the next episodes. And always just keep in mind that these cultures and these differences between us are actually a way for us to grow and
Yeah.
learn furthermore.
Be sure to clean your Orientalist glasses, and be sure to educate yourself and know the truth. And yeah, thank you guys so
We'll
much
see you
for
in the
listening.
next episode.